Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, all metalheads all over the place, and back with yet another episode of Horsemen Podcast. This
hmm
is cool. We're kind of getting back into a bit of a rhythm, which is good,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
real good.
After a year of hiatus, it kind of feels good to be back.
Absolutely. And we are back with a bang, as we are back with yet another chat, hangout, interview, whatever people want to call it. We kind of treat it more like
Yeah.
we're talking shop backstage at a show. But we are joined by the one and the only, the legendary Sebastian Ramstedt from both Necrophobic and In Aphelion. How's it going, sir?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on this.
And no problem. I mean, it's always cool when we get to talk to people within the entire metal world, whether they be fans, friends, musicians, acquaintances, whatever have you,
hmm
whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is really cool because we haven't had a musician interview on this show in about a year and a half. So this is really
hmm
cool to
Mhm.
kind of course, get back into the rhythm a little bit. So, and it's cool to talk about mine and Ricky, one of our mutual favorites, being Necrophobic, and of course,
hmm
me being a big fan of the two In Aphelion albums thus far. So, before we get into all of that, I figured because we like to ask this to all of our guests whenever they come on, all about the origins of the metalhead within. Like for you, Sebastian, how did you end up in the giant world of heavy metal, rock music in general, and then eventually into playing guitar?
Um, Actually, it started with guitar playing. I was 9 years old, and we were offered at school lessons actually, and everybody was choosing like brass instruments or trumpets and stuff like that. But I felt the guitar might be more useful, and then I was 9 years old, and I hadn't found out what kind of music I liked yet. So I listened to pop music and things on the radio. But in 1983, 1982, 1983, 1984, then there was a rise of popularity of heavy metal at school. And I started to listen to at the breaks in school to albums with Accept, like Fast as a Shark and Iron Maiden, Saxon. Saxon was big in Sweden. That Saxon was the thing, and the other bands were under. But in early 1984, they broadcasted this Dortmund 83 show. I'm sure you have seen it, with Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Scorpions,
hmm
MSG. Um, this marathon of heavy metal was for the first time on Swedish television. And this was early 1984. And that was when almost all of my generation switched into heavy metal. I'm born in 1972, and all my classmates, all the musicians I know today in Sweden, that was the day when it all tipped over. So,
hmm
and then I could already play guitar, and now I had a use for my skills. So I just had to figure out how to get a distortion and how to do power chords and stuff. So I started to like learn easy stuff like Twisted Sister songs, and but from that there was no turning back. I remember was standing on the schoolyard. This was at sixth grade, so I was 12 years old, and I had recently got a Walkman, so I could listen to my
hmm
music. That was a new thing, and I listened to "Hallowed Be Thy Name" by Iron Maiden all by myself because I was not a popular kid, so I had to stand in the corner, just ignoring the popular ones. And when I heard "Hallowed Be Thy Name," it was a life-changing experience, and I was just like, "This is what I'm going to dedicate my life to. I will never stray away from this path." And it was almost like swearing an oath or something. And uh, I had tried to belong for so long with classmates and other people, but this music made me not want. to belong. I could feel there's another way. I don't have to do what all the others do. So from then on, it was just practicing, going to record shops, just exploring everything. But that was 1984 was the year when everything, all the stars aligned, really.
Yeah, as a person who's seen Maiden twice, Hallowed Be Thy Name is a whole different experience live. And how was the metal scene in Sweden around the time you started progression into metal? Because you got to think this is 84, 85, 86,
Mhm.
87. Europe was becoming big with the Final Countdown.
Countdown.
Cattle, Cattle Mass was barely
Mm.
starting their roots. And another band we're going to talk about later was
Uh-oh.
what's the metal scene in
Oh,
Sweden?
you kind of froze for a second. I think you were saying Bathory too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
All right.
Ambassador. So how was the scene in that time frame when you were getting into metal? Was there a lot of metalheads? Were there clubs that you can
Yeah.
go? Were there like local bands?
No, you have to realize heavy metal in the mid 80s was for kids. It was school kids from 12 to 16, 17 years old. There were no grown-ups listening to metal in 1984 in Sweden. We were so young. So metal clubs, I never went to any because I was too young, but I heard, of course, there were some gigs. But all these bands like Europe and these bands, they toured like youth centers. Like
Mhm.
there was no alcohol or anything. They
Yeah.
played these really small community scenes where 15 year olds could go and watch music. So it was not an adult event. And I went to Power Slave, the concert in 1984 on the World Slavery Tour. That was my first concert. And that was the first concert in Sweden that was sold out. And that was not more like 6, 7, or 8,000 people that went into this ice hockey stadium.
Mhm.
And that was considered like big. 7,000 heavy metal kids. That was a massive amount of heavy metalers. But it really was underground. Even Iron Maiden was underground in Sweden. So it started to grow by with I think the thrash scene, which I grew into when I was 15, 16. So I went to concerts with Anthrax and Slayer, even Candlemass, and that started the whole scene. So before that, we were kids. But when I mean, after there's a before and after Rain in Blood. After that, the scene totally changed, and we were in because everybody had bands. We were competing who can play the fastest. So I think
Mhm.
that's how the Swedish death metal scene developed from these concerts with these extreme bands coming from Germany and States and so on. But not until like 1989, 1990, there were no metal clubs before that. That was a later
Mhm.
thing, actually.
That's kind of interesting because we always have the mindset that here in America and in the UK, when metal started, there was already clubs. It was you see
Yeah.
15, 16, even grown adults go to those
Mm.
clubs. And in Sweden, it's kind
Mm.
of amazing that there was nothing like that until the late 80s, early 90s. So that's
Yeah.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was a different scene. The I mean, for the grown-ups, or the 20-year-olds, or those who could drink alcohol, they were more into like Hanoi Rocks and this pre-glam scene. It was more about rock
Mhm.
and roll. It was not so much about. I mean, heavy metal was seen upon as a childish thing. While these bands deriving from New York Dolls and Rolling Stones and Aerosmith, they were called more mature, but maybe that was also because it was a drug scene. It was. I mean, you didn't do heroin and go to a Maiden gig, but you could absolutely do drugs and go and see Hannah Rock. So that's a different thing. And I also think the punk scene in Sweden, which was big in the early 80s, developed into this more glam scene with these bands, but heavy metal grow from underneath, really.
Yeah, because like you brought up right there with Swedish punk, I know like a lot of people would say that a good chunk of the big influences on the early Swedish death metal scene was grown out of the Swedish punk, and even
Mm.
like other bands like Discharge and GBH and like the early hardcore
Mhm.
stuff, which definitely like Ricky and I, we listened to a lot of that old Swedish death stuff, like early Nihilist and of course Entomb, Dismember, all that stuff, and it's like, yeah, you can
Mhm.
definitely tell a lot of punk in that, but still a lot of thrash and even a little bit of the early black metal stuff kind of interwoven in there a little bit here and there as well. Um, but getting back to guitar, which
Mm.
Ricky being the bigger guitar fan than I am, even though I love guitarists myself, we gotta say that when it comes to when we hear you play on like Necrophobic albums, and of course thus far with the two In Aphelion albums, like you have such a wonderful
You have
taste when it
such a
comes to the leads that you do, like a perfect balance of technical execution and a lot of emotional weight behind it. Almost like if I were to compare you to somebody that Ricky and I both love near and dear, Alex Skolnick from Testament,
Yeah.
quite a bit, because very similar. It's like shred-tastic, but also like great
Mm.
melody, and even when the harmonies come in, it's like whoa, and it's almost like as if like we're listening to like that one metal kid in band class in school who just is like, I don't want to hear this lame stuff, I just want to shred everyone's faces off, except like well, that one kid, like the kid who's just shredding, just goes fuck you and fuck you. You're cool though.
But
But
you know that with Alex Kolnick, I usually think that I mean I aim for doing that line in the over the wall solo, you know that melodic part, which weaves together everything so perfectly. And I think a good solo has some lines that an audience can sing along to.
yes.
That makes and
Yeah.
sometimes I say the best solo in the world is the solo in "We're Not Gonna Take It" by Twisted Sister, because it does exactly what you need. It's a guitar. People like guitars. You need a guitar solo, but most people are actually bored by guitar solos. It's only people who play that really, wow, he's doing an arpeggio, he's doing that. Most people don't know that, but they like the sound of a lead guitar. And doing a solo like that, that in "We're Not Gonna Take It," it just combines both worlds. It's a good played solo. It's just a melody line, but it gives the audience and the band exactly what it needs. So I try and make solos that will lift the song, that will make the listener think it's not taking time from the song. I want the listener to feel that it intensifies the song, but not only with techniques. People like a little fast playing, but they get bored. So a couple of fast runs, and then you have to give them something that enhances the emotion of the song. So if it's a sad song, do it sadder. Or as I did a lot on the new Necrophobic album, I switch mode in the Twilight Grey. I switch the mode, and you have a really angry song, then I can do a really sad solo. Or you have a very depressive song, and I can change the key and almost make it like hopeful or something. And then I think
Mhm.
the solo serves as a melodic bridge does in normal music, where if you listen to pop music or the Police or something, then you have a bridge that tells the different side of the story. I mean, you have this love story, everything is bad, and then you have this bridge where, oh, maybe there is some hope, and then the song gets interesting. And I try to tell something with my guitar playing that gives the listener a deeper understanding of the song. Sometimes I come up with some great shreds, and I feel this is the right tempo, this is the right key, and I can do all this stuff to impress people. And then I listen to it, and it's not interesting. And then maybe I take the whole part away, have no solo, because
Mhm.
to me it should not be about me looking as a great player. It should be about making the song sound like a better song.
Yeah. Feel the emotion, take all that emotion, all that aggression. Because now that you mention it, a band that it's really near dear to my heart, Swallow Sun, kind of has that kind of same mindset on the solos most of the time. So when you bring that anger, aggression, sadness, all your emotions into a solo that's haunting yet beautiful, the audience members like, what the fuck? This guy can really play, but yet show emotion and tell a story within the song. So when you're playing and on the new Necrophobic album, it kind of has the same parallels and also kind of gives me an example that I thought I was Pink Floyd with David Gilmour solos.
Of
Yeah.
course. I mean that's really how we do it. I mean, everybody talks about the solo in Comfortable Numb. Of course, I mean it's probably the best solo in the world. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the best example on why you should have guitar solos. That it gets so emotional, you can no longer describe it with words. You have to describe it just with pure feeling, and then the guitar comes in like a violin or something, and just
Mm-hmm.
tells you what you cannot say. And if you can do that, I mean, there's a difference with heavy metal and regular music, or like Pink Floyd. In Pink Floyd, the solo often intensifies the song. If we take Comfortable Numb, it's a very mellow song. It's easy on the output. It's easy on the levels. It's not shout.
Mm-hmm.
It's very laid back. And then the solo, he just stomps on the overdrive box, and it just he gives away these notes, and it intensifies the song. The problem with extreme metal is that everything is on 10 all the time. It's very hard to intensify blast beats. How do you do that? That is also why I sometimes get bored by extreme metal, because you cannot take it any further. So then I think I can learn from Pink Floyd and change the song. It's hard to intensify Necrophobic, but I can change. I can change what the listener feels. At least I maybe I can intensify the feelings, you know. But it's the same mindset, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I was about to bring that up about like Pink Floyd's "Comfortably Numb." How that I would say is a perfect example of how a more emotional feeling and weightful solo can be, as opposed to like just showing off like, oh, look at all these notes I can play on the fretboard and such, and the arpeggios and such. But and then speaking of guitar players, like who would you say were some of the players that really inspired you, not only in terms of leads, but also when coming up with riffs as well?
Of course, Dave Murray and Adrian Smith, they were probably my first heroes. But in during my whole life, seen all together, I think Ulli on Roth of Scorpions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
That's how I mean, the little neoclassical influences I have is probably more from him than from Yngwie Malmsteen. And also Eddie Van Halen, and the LA scene, really, Warren DeMartini, George Lynch. Those they were a lot of them were the only guitar player in the band, and they had this seamless flow from rhythm to solo. And like Eddie Van Halen played small licks, he didn't play any part of the song exactly the same. It was just so fluidly. And I'm really inspired by it. When I practice, one of these days I would like to be able to pull out an execution of the guitar like they did with just the bass player and the drummer. I'm not good enough for what I think I should be, but that drives me. That drives my search for new abilities all the time, to be one of those players. And I think they really, all these guys, they invented the guitar over and over again, and how they used the whole fretboard and all the six strings to do these harmonies with themselves. That is so cool, because in what we do, most people use power chords and maybe
Yeah.
another line, but I mean, they use the instrument that it was meant to be used, and that is cool. But I think Jake Lee and John Olerud, those two are
Hmm.
probably my favorite guitar players. Yeah,
Yeah, Uli John Roth, I feel
Yeah,
like
only
doesn't
John
get
Roth, I
yeah,
enough
feel like.
credit as far as being like one of the
yeah.
innovators of
Hmm.
incorporating that neoclassical influence.
Mm.
I would say
Yeah.
like him and Steve Hackett from Genesis were really like the first two that really
Yeah.
pushed like Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, and all those guys to
Yeah.
come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Richie
Yeah. I
Blackmore
mean,
also sneaked this stuff in pretty
yeah,
early, of course.
Richie.
We cannot
Yeah.
forget him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But everyone lives to the almighty Tony Iommi.
In
Everything
terms
from
of
Tony
riffs,
Iommi
yeah.
onwards.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah.
But so now to get into your history with Necrophobic. So obviously, you know,
Um,
Necrophobic began in '89. You didn't join until '96, I believe.
yeah, that's right.
So, so how did you get into Necrophobic? Like, did they come to you, or did you go to them? Like, how did you end up in the band when the time came?
We were the same gang, so to speak. We all went to the same school. Me and Joachim and David Parland and Sander, who was the original singer, and a lot of Anders of Necrophobic now went to the same school. There were a lot of metalheads in the school I was in when I was 18 years old. So we all got to know each other from there. And I was in other bands, a band called Exhumed, and then a band called Morpheus in the early 90s. And we did hang out with the Necrophobic guys. Um, Actually, I was not that fond of what they did. I didn't think Necrophobic was the best band, but I was more into very technical stuff like Atheist or even Death with the Human album. And I really liked that for a while, but so I thought Necrophobic was too straightforward. I mean, Necrophobic took me back to the Pleasure to Kill era, like 85, 86. And for me, that was several years ago. So I felt like these guys does not keep up with the times, really. But I think they were ahead of me. They had already explored that, and they had felt that simplicity is more effective. They had leaned more into atmospheres, feelings, and stuff like that. And I was still in pushing as many riffs as possible into a song. So it was in 1994, I think, that I watched Necrophobic live. For I have seen them several times, but then I saw them and I was totally blown away by the song "The Call." This was before Dark Side, and I felt they were so brave to do this really harmonic riff over E minor and C, and there was nothing fancy going on, just a good melody, short song, um, verse, bridge, chorus, no fuss. And I was like, they are so brave to rely on four riffs while I try and push 15 or 16 riffs into a song to hide the song from not being maybe that interesting. And that opened my eyes for the kind of brilliance that Necrophobic had going on. And I hadn't heard I had heard the section, but not that much. So I think Necrophobic was the first melodic black and death metal band that I really listened to.
Hmm.
And when David quit the band, I had I was already in the community with them. So Tobias, who switched to vocals, he asked me, "You want to play with us?" And I was out of my band, so um, I just had a time over and went with them to the rehearsal place, and we rehearsed the whole summer for the Dark Side album. But and I knew the songs, but the other guitar player, Martin, he felt that they had been working so long on these songs, and I think I was a better solo player than him, and I think he was a bit threatened for me to come in on the album and overshadow things that he had been working with. So he said, "No, it's the three of us that has been working with this on this album. You cannot join on the recording. You will get one solo and two other small leads." But he wanted to keep it clear that I was the newcomer, but in reality I was already in the band. So, and that is something I kind of regret, that I didn't stand my ground, because I think the album, it's maybe my favorite Necrophobic album, actually, Dark Side, but I feel production wise it could have been a better album if I also had a say in it. If I was one of four people, not necessarily would I have played on all songs, but if I really, really had been into the production and stuff, I think it would have been a stronger album, actually. But I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
it's kind of good because it's kind of necro also.
Yeah.
brutal.
And funny enough, you brought up like early on, with bands like Dissection, and then of course there were
Mm.
even other bands around the same time like Dawn, Sacramentum, even
Opeth
Naglfar
later
to a
on.
lesser degree, and then of course you had other bands that were already experimenting with death metal, because a lot
Oh,
of
there's
people I think
a lot
kind
of
of
people.
forget that it's like early on with death metal, it was still very rooted in the American thrash scene, like, Death and Morbid Angel, even Cannibal Corpse, all still kind of came out of their roots of thrash. And then once you get into, like, especially 1991, you already had so many subsects coming up, like technical death metal, Death Doom, which this guy absolutely adores. I do too. And then as it keeps going along, and then you get to say like the first Necrophobic album, Nocturnal Silence, which Ricky and I are both huge fans. Like we always say, or I always say, it sounds like if you took the best parts of Left Hand Path and the best parts of Under the Sign of Black Mark, combine them together, and you get early Necrophobic. And then, of course,
Yeah.
as we've listened to over time, like not much about the HM2 tone anymore and going for more their own thing, but still retaining that combo of melodic death metal and of course that like early black metal sound, to the point where myself and a lot of other people would argue Necrophobic were the first true blackened death metal band, like actively
Mm.
combining both genres in their own ways.
Mm.
Sometimes it's like we'll listen to some songs, it's like, oh, this sounds a little bit more towards black
Mm.
metal, oh, this one sounds a little more towards
Yeah.
death metal, and we like how there's this push and pull kind of feeling with a lot of the songs, especially on the more recent stuff that I
Mm.
really, really dug. But, like, so would you say perhaps that, well, I don't know how I should really put this, but, like, without Necrophobic, perhaps you wouldn't have bands that came along after, like, Behemoth or Belphegor or Hate, especially those Polish bands or even some other bands from
Mm.
Scandinavia. Like, would you say that Necrophobic would really be the first true black and death metal band, or would you say perhaps going further back that there were maybe bands that were kind of already developing that sound prior?
Uh, I think we were one of the first bands, but it's easy to think now that we influenced the scene, but in reality, back in 92, 93, 94, 95, even 96, Necrophobic didn't really reach outside of Sweden, except for those who really dug to find stuff. I mean, what really happened was that bands like Dissection, they were out touring. So I mean, Necrophobic and Dissection kind of grow together. We explore this very melodic, dark black metal, death metal together, but it in reality it was Dissection that reached out. So I think they were the ones carrying the torch out in the world. Necrophobic was not, but the endurance of Necrophobic has continued since then to influence the scene. I mean, we have done so many more albums than this section did, and we have had a quite consistent quality on our albums. I wouldn't say we have really bad albums. There's some that I don't like that much, but kind of good albums actually during a career. And I think that we in many ways we have kept the scene alive by not straying away from the path. We are out there. We make ourselves relevant, but continue this style and continue to make it relevant really. So I think in all we have influenced the world a lot, but back then it was not we really.
Yeah, it was like
Yeah,
it had to take a lot of time for it to like really
yeah,
reach out, unless you were
yeah.
like super hardcore and getting into the early stuff and even like the old demos and being like, "Hey, we ought to make
Yeah.
a band that's kind of like this, but something of our own," that kind of thing. Because nowadays, obviously, when people say black and death metal, one of the arguably the first band people would think of is Behemoth, which it's because Behemoth. I mean, they're now a worldwide sensation, obviously, over the last 15 plus years, you could say. And I know then I'm
Absolutely.
jealous. This guy has seen them live. So, but yeah, and of course, and like you could even argue that prior to Dissection and Necrophobic and Behemoth and Belphegor, like you even had like some of the early death metal bands kind of toying with that idea a little bit, like Morbid Angel is probably the big one. Even early Deicide,
Yeah,
you could say, had
Yeah.
that. Early Immolation,
absolutely.
especially early Immolation, Incantation. It's like you could
Yeah,
definitely tell they were like the direct predecessors to everything that followed, but just done the way it ought to be
but
done.
I also think the Eastern European scene with Masters Hammer and Tormentor, they influenced this with strong melody lines. I would say the first Possessed albums with the song "The Exorcist." That melody line is something that we and all this band wanted to have more of. But I remember now when we're talking about it, there's one band that I think influenced us and influenced, yeah, fantastic. That's really the only death metal album you need. But I think uh, the band that really influenced us, also Norway and also Dissection, is Unanimated. I mean, the early
Yes.
stuff by Unanimated, they were
Mm.
so early with this tremolo picking, really strong melodies. And for us, when I heard that demo in, is it from 90 or 91 or 92, when it came out, I was blown away. But because this is new. This is not how you do it. Everybody else is tuning down the guitars and try and be as brutal as possible. And here comes this band with fragile melodies, eerie melodies, totally taking over the whole soundscape. So I would actually give a lot of credit to them for at least starting the scene in Sweden.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's
I
kind of
completely
interesting that
forgot
you
about that
mentioned that.
animated.
Yeah, I completely forgot about it too. But being that you guys are next to Norway, of course, I'm pretty sure there was some influence that Norway influenced you and you influenced Norway. I had to ask this. I've asked the guys in Blood Red Throne about this since they're Norwegians. You being that you were around this period of time in the big Norwegian black metal scene, of course, you've heard the stories. I want to know from your perspective when you heard about everything that was going on in Norway, from the good, the bad,
And the
and the
ugly.
ugly, and the ugly. Because I always find it interesting because we talk to the guys in Blood Red Throne and their perspectives. I
Because they're
want to know it
from
from
Norway,
somebody.
and obviously that,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it'd be kind of funny to. I kind of would like to know your perspective because, of course, there was this war that was going up between Sweden and Norway, quote unquote war between Sweden and Norway. And was there any backlash from the Norwegians to you guys and vice versa? Because the whole thing with Euronymous and everything that.
I mean, Joachim, he was early in the tape trading and the letter writing and in the underground community. So he was already having contact with Euronymous and all these people in late 80s, I think. I didn't know about that then because I was more interested in going to the pub and listening to
Mhm.
the major albums of Morbid Angel, Possessed, and all these thrash bands. So I was not really not in the underground that deep that he was. And when I first heard of uh, the Norwegian black metal scene, I heard Bursum and Early Immortal and Dark Throne. To be honest, I was not impressed. Uh, Actually, I was. I mean, I was 20 years old in 1992 when all these things happen. And when you're 20 years old, you are not as impressed as when you're 16. That's a lifetime of change. And for me, it was like all of a sudden, all these people that was in the death metal scene, which was a kind of second wave of punk scene, do it yourself. There's no money involved, but it's for the love of the music and keeping the community together. And all of a sudden, these younger, really fucking stupid kids became Satanists and started burning things up. And I was like, what the fuck are those stupid kids doing? I was amazed how bad I thought it was. And there's only one person in every band, and he cannot play any of the instruments. What the fuck is this? So that's the honest opinion from 20-year-old Sebastian.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Then I,
Yeah.
I needed some guidance into the scene. So with the other members of Necrophobic, they were like, you're listening to this the wrong way, because I was still like a Morbid Angel album was tight. It was everything at the right pace. It was organized. It was mathematically correct. If you listen to first Bursum, nothing is in place, right? We shouldn't say the band name, but yeah, that.
Yeah.
I mean,
We'll run it
and
by quote
and
legal.
yeah, but but when when you listen with friends that think this is really good, then it's like trying out a new food or something. You don't not know what to expect from sushi the first time you eat it. It's just
Hmm.
fucking cold rice with
Mhm.
strange fish. But then you learn with friends. So then we listen to this, and it was all about the atmosphere. And at the same time, we listened to a lot to the goth scene. We listened to Sisters of Mercy, Fields of the Nephilim, Dead Can Dance. And with those influences going into what Mayhem, Bursum, Darkthrone did from a more atmospheric perspective, it was easier to find the brilliance in it. So I switched fast from thinking this is the worst shit I have ever heard to fuck again. I'm late into this, like I was late into Necrophobic. I thought I had I was further, but really then I saw the brilliance in it. And by the time the Mysterious came out, and by the time the scene exploded really in 94, 95, 96, then I was hooked. But it took some time because I felt it was forced and that it was only for effect. I could really just see kids trying to get attention, which I still, to some, I don't think it was very ritualistic. To be honest, I think they were very young. They were trying to drive. I mean, even
Mhm.
Euronymous said that he was trying to get attention to his, but it's. I mean, it's nothing. It's really something else. The early days in Norway, that is something that's a big part of the metal history. Really, you can never
Yeah.
deny that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because it's been romanticized now with so it's kind of crazy to think that back then you're saying that in your own perspective that they were, what the hell they're doing? This is kind of stupid. Why are they doing this? And for us who didn't grow up in that scene, who later found out by watching videos, we're like, this guys did this? What the fuck? Are they nuts? So it's like kind of crazy to think. And of course, the Norwegian scene only lasted from 91 to what, 94, 95.
The
So it
peak,
wasn't really that.
the peak of it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, I mean, you guys would have been, should have been proud when, of course, Pelle Alle, Dead, became the frontman of Dead. I mean, a fellow Sweden, fronting a Norwegian band.
There was competition, but we had Quarton, we had Battery. I mean, you cannot win over there. You cannot.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you do. And we knew that, and we kind of stood our ground. We were proud because, I mean, nowadays people will say that the origin of course it's Newcastle, England, but the origin of black metal, the second wave, people will say it's Norway. But I will say Sweden had really extremely important role in that, and it was not until Helle went to Norway that they switched into this, what it became. So I think, but there was letter sending. Even when I played in Morpheus, one of the guys in my band had a girlfriend who all of a sudden decided to become a Satanist, and she went to Norway and started to hang out with these guys, and they sent letters to us, and like really, I think it was the girls sending letters, but there was so many people around Euronymous and them that also, without them knowing, probably put like gasoline on the fire. So there was maybe around 91, 92, 93. I also thought they were kind of assholes. I mean, let us do our thing. Why are you so interested in what we do if you think it's so bad that you have to write letters about it? But I think Necrophobic was never.
Yeah, like it's like why does there have to be a dictatorship about what you could do within the metal community? I never understood that.
I mean, that's why I always find it fascinating between the quote unquote war between Sweden and Norway in the 90s, especially. I think it was Fenris who said this onto the Light, Texas, that before they found out that Var killed Euronymous, they thought it was somebody from Sweden who killed Euronymous. So, and I think Fenris said that there were some guys who either wanted to retaliate or were willing to go to Sweden and beat the living crap out of everyone in Stockholm in the scene. Which, again, why are you doing this? Why?
Yeah.
Do you take things to the extreme? Which literally, I mean, I've always said this: you cannot top what the Norwegians did in metal ever. Again. There's nothing anyone in this world can do that can top it. They literally jump up a cliff. They literally went to the extreme because how could guys do that? And I actually got a scare when I was going to go see Cradle of Filth. That same day, the Notre Dame church was burning. The first thing I thought was like, oh no,
It's
not again. It's happening again. It's happening again. I was so scared when I was gonna go see Cradle of Filth that day. I was like, there's gonna be protesters, there's gonna be whatever the fuck. Thankfully there wasn't, but a part of me was like, I really wanted some protesters at the Cradle of Filth show.
Just so you could run up to them and just be like, why do you bother wasting your time with this?
Pretty much.
Do you not have anything better to do?
Yeah, that was like the closest scare I got to that.
Yeah, which, I mean, I'll flat out and say, I was born and raised in a religious home, but I'm not, overtly religious. Hell, I mean, look at my collection, for crying out loud. It's, mostly the most extreme stuff you can imagine, but also the classics and even some other genres, too. But yeah, it's, it kind of goes back to, like what you were saying a little bit ago, Sebastian, about how you were not impressed when you first heard that stuff, because It's like 20-year-olds not as impressed as a 16-year-old. And I think that is a big part of why
Yeah.
you saw a lot of those Norwegians go to that extreme, because they were so young, they didn't know any
Mm.
better, or even though they should have. And it
No.
just led to this like cult like behavior. And thankfully,
Yeah.
most of those guys that were in that scene have grown up and realized, what in
Yeah.
the hell were we thinking back in those days, and have matured, and
Yeah.
have, like Darkthrone, for example, like, they started in one place being a straight up death metal band, totally inspired by Sweden, and then they decide to go into being a black metal band, and now, really, after everything that happened with Euronymous, they kind of just wanted to be like, well, we want to kind of stay what we are, or what we had been doing, but let's kind of get back to our roots a little bit. Like, we loved the rock and Bathory stuff, especially Celtic Frost, and even some like Black Sabbath, Motorhead, and Scorpions, Judas Priest, and that's why I love a lot of what Darkthrone's been doing for the past 15 years, where they just kind of go back to like classic metal and speed metal and doom and a little thrash, and even little hints of death metal
Yeah.
come up here and there. But yeah,
Hmm.
it's just all about, like, of course, like the age of when all this kind of stuff happens. It can really shape who you are. Like John from Dissection, like, we've all heard the stories that he was really obsessed with that whole thing, and
Yeah.
look where he ended up as a result, which I'll just leave it at
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
But that you brought up Bathory, Ricky wanted to
Yeah.
ask you a little something.
I
Yeah.
mean, I didn't know this. Well, I mean, I should have known this, but while I was getting ready for this interview, I started re-listening to some of your material, and I was like, oh, it's been a while since I listened to Necrophobic. I didn't
Mm.
realize that the first three Necrophobic albums were under Blackman Productions.
Yeah.
Of course, Blackman Productions is mostly known for having Bathory, the entire catalog.
Edge of
So the question,
Sanity, Flesh
yeah, so the
Crawl, a lot
question,
of good
yeah,
bands.
so the question I gotta ask: did you guys ever had a chance to meet Corson or had a little conversation with him, or maybe like, hey, you should probably like make a special appearance on an album, a guitar solo, or something?
Mhm. Uh, Let me tell you this: we were on Black Mark, and was during the times that we spoke about earlier before this interview. That when we were young, and you did interviews, you had a line telephone. Yeah, there was a
Mm-hmm.
big phone bill to call to interviews outside of
Mm-hmm.
Sweden. So we always went to the Black Mark office to do these interviews. And at the Black Mark office worked Quarton's father, Börje Forsberg, and his sister, and we got to know them pretty well. Also, they had a lot of Bathory stuff, old shirts and stuff, and we just went through all the drawers and found stuff that really nowadays it would bring so much money, but for them it was just leftovers. This was at the time that Quarton did Octagon and these albums that are really not that popular. But
Yeah.
so Bathory was not super um, cult even in the mid
Mm-hmm.
90s. Not yet. I mean, for us it was something extraordinary, but it was, I mean, the yellow goat was not that expensive. And the thing was that Börje, Quarton's father, he still pretended that he didn't know Quarton. So he was telling us all these stories when we were there. I met this strange guy, Quarton. I went down to this rehearsal room and I heard this demonic music from hell. And we knew, of course, that he was his father, but we played along. So because we wanted to hear these stories about the cult, about Bathory, and we let him, and we were impressed. Well, really? How did you meet him? I mean, that was like an act. And when we released Dark Side, we had a release party at a local pub in Stockholm, and we were sitting there drinking beers with the nearest friends. And then all of a sudden, Quarton walked in. So he was went in and he stood by the bar for 10 minutes or so. but we all also knew that Corton was somewhat of a recluse. You know, he didn't socialize much. He didn't hang around on concerts and stuff like that. He was like a shadow, and we didn't want to disturb him by then. I kind of regret it now that we didn't say hello to him or shook his hand or something, but still he was not a cult person when he still was alive, and at the point didn't do very interesting music. So right then it was more like we were sitting, you see it's Corton over there, yeah, I saw him, let him be, more like that. That was the closest we came to him. But these years being close to the family made us feel closer to Battery than we would otherwise. And nowadays, when this has become this cult of mythological proportions, uh, it's kind of neat to have been on that really grounded side of things, where we search for t-shirts with his father and listen to these stories. It's I mean, it's not as cool as people want it to be. Well, back then when everything was hellfire and damnation, but really it was kind of nice people in a small office. But I like to have both of these perspectives, and uh, it makes me appreciate Bathory even more, that the whole family was in on building the myth. I think that's a cool thing. I mean, my father does not try to build a myth about necrophobic. I mean, this is something really special, really.
Yeah, like whenever we had Dan Swano on here 2.5 years ago, we talked about that too, about how Corthon actually helped get Edge of Sanity signed to Black Mark early on with the Kernagia demos and stuff, and
Mm.
Yeah.
and I remember like hearing that, I'm like, wow, that was really cool on him to help out one of our mutual favorite bands, being Edge of Sanity. I
Yeah.
would have had to imagine probably something similar or something like that would have happened back
Mm.
early on with Necrophobic, where it's like, oh, so and so heard demo, sign them,
Mm.
and Black Mark,
I
which
don't
of
think so.
course Dan told us, like, the management of Black Mark was kind of,
Mm.
a little iffy.
Not the
Yeah,
best.
yeah, yeah.
Not the best.
Yeah, at least not
Yeah,
Earache Records bad, which, that's another
Oh
conversation.
God. Oh God. Oh God. Don't get me even started during that period of earache.
No,
no.
no. But,
But
um,
in some way, I mean, in some way, I think necrophobic actually can blame for not reaching out of Sweden during 95, 96 is somewhat Black Mark's fault, because they were such an unreliable label that people didn't want to work with bands on the label. And I mean, organizers in Europe thought it was too sketchy to bring the bands from Black Mark out. So we were kind of not canceled, but some kind of gatekeeping for we could not
Yeah.
really go anywhere because of that. So it was not good, really.
yeah, and thankfully, especially with you guys now on Centric Media, a far bigger label, and are now able to
Ooh.
play all over the world. Like, hell,
Yeah.
if only I was rich, and I could have gone to go to when you guys played Maryland Death Fest last year, I would have been like, oh my god, or not last year, 2022, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it would have been like, oh, it's magical, which is why I'm kind of upset. I'm probably not going to get to go this year to see my pals in BRT, which that's the tough part about with my living situation. It unless it's like Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton, Ohio, it's
Mm.
harder for me to go to shows, which thankfully I've been slowly getting more into going to shows. Like, hell, last August, just a week before I turned 30, I went to see Hellwitch, Wraith, Midnight, and Exciter live, my first ever club show. And it was magical, even though, oh my
Yeah.
god, it was so hot in there because there was no AC. But
Oh
I
yeah.
didn't care. I did not care. It was a magical time. But um, But now to talk about In Aphelion a little bit. So,
Yeah.
so I remember because one of the big resources Ricky and I get our stuff from is the Metal Archives. Even if you disagree with
Mm.
a lot of what they put and not put on as far as bands, which don't get me going on that tangent, Ricky.
Not
But
again.
but like whenever we do reviews or recaps, retrospectives about bands and such, we always go to Metal Archives because it's like, despite the questionable uh, motives,
Oh,
they
different.
got everything like so well organized. Like you can dig deeper into like where it was recorded at and like how long it was recorded, or like when stuff's coming out. Like I would use it occasionally. Metalstorm.net when it comes to the more bigger mainstream bands like Mark Tremonti's solo album that just came out. But I remember, excuse me, 2022, looking through the release list, and I was looking for stuff to check out at a certain time, and I come across Inaphilion's Moribund, and I'm like, I wonder what
Mm.
this is. And I saw that it was you and Johan from Necrophobic, and I was like, oh, this will be interesting. And I listened to it, and I was like, whoa, this is
Mm.
some magical black metal right here. And then even further on the new one, Reaper Dawn, which I still say that in my opinion, as far as like black metal albums, was my favorite, just because like your vocals on there too were very strong. Like
Mm.
definitely reminded me a lot of like old Corthon, a little bit of Dead, a little bit of say even Nocturno Culto, like combining all that into like your own voice. But the thing that also stood out to me about your vocals was your death growls. And it got
Mm.
me thinking, like, man, it's like as much as I love Anaphilion, I love that their take on black metal with incorporating a little bit of like death metal double time at times, almost like a black metal bolt thrower a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
But hearing
Yeah.
them roars, especially on the closing track, I was thinking, and I even
Mm.
said it in the review when I talked about it, man, I'd be curious to hear Sebastian do vocals for a death metal project because you had a very
Ooh.
strong roar on there. So, but how did Inaphilion come about? Like, what made you want to start that as a project, as an outlet for the more blackened side of everything?
Um, it's, I mean, it came with the extra time during the pandemic, of course. That when we were not touring that much, there was extra time for doing something about ideas that didn't develop within Necrophobic. But it was also from frustration, really, because when we were working on Dawn of the Damned, we it gets really intense when you're trying to get to put the ideas together and you're working with four other people, and we had some kind of argument that didn't they were not solved immediately, so there was a couple of days or week of radio silence during the this work with this, and then I couldn't get in contact with Joachim, and it was. I felt like shit. If this ends now, it, I didn't think it would, but the feeling
Mhm.
struck me that if this ends, it's I'm not one of the original members of Necrophobic. That's Joachim. If there's a conflict that we cannot solve, it will be Joachim that goes away with name Necrophobic. That's unquestionable. I mean, I joined later, but still, I to this to now in 2024 I have written most of the material, even when you put in the early efforts. I have written most of the Necrophobic songs, even the songs where it doesn't only say that I am the writer. I am still the arranger. So since 1996, I have done so much for the band. And I felt if we will not work with each other in the future, I will have to start from scratch. I will have to start from nothing because this is necrophobic, even it is, but it's not my heritage. I mean, that's Joachim. So I felt okay. I better think about putting my name into something that is mine. And that was because of the time and because of this argument within the band. And I started to write music out of the ideas that the others didn't really like. And I then I started to write ideas for. I mean, usually I write songs with Joachim and Anders and the other guys what they can do on their instrument in mind. Joachim is a very straightforward but also a minimalistic drummer. If you listen to the album, he executes this perfectly, but he doesn't want to go outside of his box. So some riffs are better with different drums. So I started to develop those riffs that maybe another drummer could do better. I started with vocals and with lyrics that could be better expressed by someone else than Anders. At first, I didn't know if I wanted to sing, but this just and it was so fun writing and then within a week we were friends again in Necrophobic. It was not a big fuss, but then this had already started to grow, so I felt like, well, now I have the time. Let's keep on this track. Let's make this two parallel worlds.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so that was in Aphelion, and it started to shape in I think I took away a lot of the death metal and I put in thrash and heavy metal instead. So I mean, you can still hear it's Sebastian who writes the melodies, but instead of having the force from death metal, I have the force from thrash metal and heavy metal. That's really different. And my vocals are somewhat different than Anders, and it's a different thing to sing my own lyrics because when I write a lot of lyrics for Anders, all of the lyrics almost on the latest albums, and it something happens when he takes my words and he has to do the words to his own, but it that makes the expression of the lyrics stray away from my vision. When I can keep the words within my voice, something happens that is very important to me. So that's really the thing, and I think now I'm less concerned if we have another argument. I'm less concerned if Joachim would say, "Hey guys, we had a good run, but I want to be me with my family." And I mean, we're not exactly young. Some of these days it will happen, you know. But
Hmm.
I'm not. When I have in a field, I have had a steady ground with Reaper, Dawn, and Moribund. I'm not that concerned anymore because now my bloodline is secured, so to speak. If I mean, maybe it's childish, I don't know, but that's how I feel it. For me, it's a kind of insurance to be a musician as long as I want to, because I don't have to rely on someone else. This is my project, really, even though I have Johan and the others, but it's still something that I started up as a my own one-man project, really.
Yeah.
And how did you get Marco from Cryptosis on board to join you for this too?
He, I ran across him in the summer of 2019 when we played a festival together with his old band Distillator, and I was so impressed by their show because they were such fantastic musicians, still doing kind of straightforward thrash. And I was amazed. So I bought the album, and then we started to speak over Messenger. And when I put out demos from early in Aphelion riffs, I just put out excerpts like to see what people would think. Then he spoke up to me and he said, "Hey, you want real drums on those stuff because I mean, you can hear it's easy drummer. You should do this for real." And so it was him. He came to me, and I said, "Of course I want." So, and then we started to work on the ideas that would be Moribund. And then Johan joined late. I was thinking about keeping him out from this from the beginning, but I have always played with him in all bands. And when he kind of he started to show interest and ask questions, and he asked if I wanted to help with how to reach out to labels and stuff like that. He's really good at that. Then I felt this is so much more fun when I have Johan by my side, and I mean we are like a metal rescue team. Why we come as a pair, so why don't have him in this? So that was how it was. But I had no intention of playing live or doing a band from the beginning. That it developed into that really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because funny with Johan, I was thinking in the back of my head too that in terms of like guitar duos, like you and Johan to me are like the Black and Death, Adrian and Dave to a degree, which it's like because like even Johan when it comes to like rhythm playing, he is strong as well on rhythm guitar too. And actually, and happy to hear that Marco came to you about it because, yeah, he's an awesome drummer, and I'm happy that he'd been playing live in Skeletal Remains recently too. Which, of course, Ricky and I
Sure.
both love the new Skeletal Remains, even though Marco wasn't in at the time. But actually, so fun little thing with Ricky and I here. So we've done this a couple of times in the past where I brought up. He kind of already knows where I'm going with this. So
Yep.
brought up Metal Archives earlier, and despite again, I always keep prefacing, despite how much I may not like some of their inconsistencies, I will give them credit where it's due. That website has turned me on to so many bands simply for like you could just type in one band and then you go to that similar artist tab and there's a plethora of bands that it's like, hey, if you like Morbid Angel, you'll probably like Vader or Immolation or whatever, and that's how I got into so many bands, like especially thrash bands from even back in the late '80s. I didn't really know about, like Zentrix, for example. I found them out because they were often compared to like Testament and Metallica, and when it's like you hear them, it's like, yeah, that stuff definitely makes sense. It sounds like Injustice for All meets the New Order a little bit. But if I can pull this up without anything going to poo, because it could be that way. So, funny enough, we were talking a little bit about like Dissection, Sacramentum, and all those kind of bands. So the top five we looked up on the Necrophobic page on Metal Archives. It was like Dissection, Sacramentum. I think the other one was Unanimated, Watain, and Dismember. So it's like perfect eclectic list of like the blackened death, mellow death, and even old Swedish death kind of combined. And then of course it goes down even more rabbit holes, like even like Hypocrisy, At the Gates, Tholkandra from Germany, who I think is very underrated band, like Stefan Kummer from Obscura. He definitely loves his Dissection and Necrophobic for damn sure when people listen to Tholkandra, but when it comes down to like underrated bands, one could argue that Necrophobic would be among, especially going back to the '90s, where, like you said, Black Mark didn't really help out with getting the band to go anywhere because there seemed to be this like hesitation, like, whoa, let's step aside on this one, fellas. I would argue for sure Necrophobic would be among the most underrated metal bands, period. And I'm glad that, especially in recent years, now that bigger label, you're going to do bigger tours and stuff, it's like it's finally clicked for a lot of people. If there was one band or even an album that you have listened to in your life that you feel more people should give love and check out more in depth, who would you say is that band or album, and why?
First Metal Church album is it's so fantastic. For me, it's one of the most important albums. It was the crossover from heavy metal to thrash metal, but I think that album has nowhere near the recognition it should. I would even say it should be up there with Master of Puppets. I think that's a 10 out of 10. It's totally brilliant. Metal Church is probably the most underrated band I can think of. They deserve so much more, really.
Yeah. Actually,
Now,
well, real quick,
now I want to get some
I was
metal
gonna
church.
say, yeah, I was gonna say too. Funny enough, when they had their old vocalist Ronnie Monroe, just up the road from my house, my mother runs a lodging resort with rooms and cabins and stuff. Ronnie Monroe stayed up there with his wife, and what was funny,
Really?
yeah, what was funny, she called me one day asking me if I knew who Metal Church was. And I'm like, yeah. And she said, well, their singer's here, and he actually recorded a video like greeting for me, and I was like, what? I couldn't believe that. I was like, really? Like that was unexpected. Like, consider me shocked. But
You fucking Mark.
Thanks. I tell you, Sebastian, this kid over here, it just.
Oh, shut up! Shut up!
But like, if I were to actually recommend something for you, Sebastian, because I know you were talking about how early on you were really into like atheist and death and like the more technical kind of bands. I would argue, and I think Ricky might know a little bit of where I'm going with this. So recently, like we've been digging the new Blood Incantation recently because it's just whoa. But I would say, in my opinion, in terms of like underground, like bands that only did demos and then just kaput after that, probably in my opinion the most underrated as far as like bands that only did a few things, Time Ghoul. Yeah, Time Ghoul, like especially, for those who love like Morbid Angel, particularly like that Altars of Madness, Covenant, that kind of sound, mixed in with a little bit of like the breakdowns of like Suffocation early on, but with a lot of dark melody and atmosphere and even bordering on prog a little bit. Time Ghoul is definitely a band that I think I would say has gotten more love recently through Blood Incantation, because you talk to the Blood Incantation guys, they would flat out say Time Ghoul was their number one influence in terms of like shaping their sound, being like old school death metal but very cosmic sci-fi and Lovecraftian stuff. So Time Ghoul definitely would be a band I would recommend for you, because they crossed a gamut so much. It's like they're straight up death metal, but there's occasional black metal moments, lots of doom in there too, and a little hint of prog. And the vocals, I gotta say, the vocals. I don't know if you're familiar with Dallas Toller Wade from Nile.
I know.
Yeah, like when he was in Nile from 97 till 2017, like he has a very distinct like growl to him. Their frontman from Time Ghoul almost sounds exactly like Dallas Toller Wade, but his clean vocals, he does like more like low, almost chanty clean vocals, and like some of the atmosphere, it makes me think, am I hearing like dark evil Star Wars or Star Trek at times? Because it does kind of get into that kind of level of cosmic feelings. But yeah, they were a band from Missouri, so obviously not the best state here in America to kind of get recognition. And they only did 2 demos. Both were brilliant. But Dark Descent Records, they recently well, I shouldn't say recently. They've been reissuing their stuff for 13 years now. But they have the compilation 1992 to 1994 discography, where you get both demos just slightly tweaked up to sound a little better. So if you ever come across that vinyl, that's a must grab, because it's so wild. And you're absolutely welcome.
Yeah. I need to get that Time Ghoul compilation one of these days. And first of me, if I were to mention an underrated band, I mean, I have a lot, especially in Death Doom. There's probably 1 to 2 bands, but if I had to choose one, I'd probably have to go with
Mhm.
Winter with the album Into Darkness.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Have
Yeah,
not heard.
basically, yeah, Winter, they were another one of those short-lived bands from here in the States. They were from New
Mhm.
York, and
York.
a lot of
Mhm.
people would think, well, they're from New York, they gotta be playing like slammy stuff or like brutal stuff or even
Mhm.
more hardcore. No, they were.
Nope.
Some people would call them pioneers of death doom. Well, I would always say Asphyx,
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
my opinion, were the pioneers. But
Yeah.
Winter, they were. Yeah, I can definitely agree. Winter, they were definitely one of the first to the mark. 1990 when that album came out. It was basically like if you took Celtic Frost, made it even slower and a little more
Slower.
grimy.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's essentially like, especially in the vocals, like the vocals kind of remind me of Tom Moyer, except a lot gruffer.
Okay.
Yeah, that
Mhm.
that one's definitely a must check out because it's
hmm
pretty pioneering.
It's pretty good.
Cool.
and
Cool.
and that's the beautiful thing about metal. It's like no matter who you are, whether you're in a band or just a fan or an acquaintance, it's always about like, hey, check these kind of things out and see what you like,
Yeah.
and that's the
I
thing we
mean,
love the most about this
I mean
music.
that's why we
Yeah.
have the big city shows that Levi and I
Yeah.
have.
Or in the
Yeah.
case of others with vinyl or even cassettes,
Yeah.
it's always about keeping the scene alive, whether it be through purchasing stuff or going to shows or just talking about it.
Mhm.
And that's really been the bedrock
Absolutely.
of this show is always about like, yeah, like, hey, you ever checked out this band? No, I haven't. Holy shit, this is incredible. Why didn't I listen to this sooner?
Oh
Or
yeah.
in the case of talking to people like you, musicians, and being like getting all this insight and also having a great time talking about these kind of things because it just the metal community as a whole, no matter your
Oh,
profession, background, what have you, it's an international language, and that's the thing that's
absolutely.
most important to
Yeah.
all of us.
Mm. It really is. I mean, you meet your brothers and sisters wherever you go in the world, and it's
Mhm.
really like a breed of our own. And the interest in the music and how we want to analyze it and listen to it, that sets it apart from pop music or other kind of music that are more like background noise to socializing. If, for us, the music comes first. It's almost like people like who likes yes or are really interested in trying to explain, and that's, I think that is why the scene is so strong, but it's also why the scene is not bigger. I mean, in a perspective where you have Beyonce or Bruce Springsteen, then even bands like Anthrax are underground. You know, in this whole. And I kind of like that it is like that because those who are not interested would kind of bloat the scene or dilute it if
Mhm.
because we need to have these kind of conversations. I mean, wherever you go, you have something in common, and if people only were there because it was popular or cool or just a socialite, it would become something else. And so I think it's really special, and there's no age anymore. Yeah, I mean, I'm over 50, and you can be 16. It doesn't matter. It's one of the few genres where age doesn't matter at all. We're all the same to this. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And also it can be life saving. Like definitely I know
Yeah.
Ricky, he's told me that
Mm.
he's had some rough patches and that like especially a band like Swallow the Sun, he tells me all the time they've been like life
Mm.
saving and I can definitely see why.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Or in the case of me, like I always say to people like Metallica, they were the gateway band when I was a wee lad in the early 2000s and they still remain my favorite band of all time. That will never
Mm.
change. And it's still
Mm.
funny. It's like they're probably the one of only a few true metal bands that made it as big or even bigger than a
Mm.
lot of pop. And
Mm.
yeah, you can people can have their opinions about Metallica, even if I may not agree with them 100%. But the cool thing with what Metallica has done, it's led to more people who may not have gotten into metal to get into it and then eventually get down into bigger rabbit holes. Like, that was basically the same way with me. That was where I started. Well, them and to a lesser extent Black Sabbath through classic rock radio. Then you eventually get down into like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and then Megadeth, and then that's how I got into thrash with Slayer, Testament, Exodus, Sepultura. Then high school came, got into death metal, didn't get into black metal until like 11, 10 years ago. Then getting into prog, doom. It's like it's just the never-ending cycle of how you find bands and different genres that you otherwise may not have heard of in the first place. And the other thing too, I forgot to mention this too. So, like, how we started this show, Ricky and I, as well as our friends Artur, Raphael, and Hannah, because we're all from all over the place. Like Ricky, Raphael, and I are all from the States, Ohio, Texas, and Raphael being from Florida. Hannah from Germany, Artur from Portugal. We were all in like live streams on other like YouTube channels, like Banger TV, for example, and we would be in their live stream chats, and then eventually we all got onto Facebook and we're like, we ought to do a show together. And 2018 was when the show was born, and granted it's been through hiatuses and such, but we're still going today, and it's all because we just love the music that we love. Which can't be more grateful than that.
I can't be grateful because metal has given me so much music, and as every time I go to a show, I always go alone to shows. I always make new friends. I always meet new people. I always make new connections, and I always am amazed at the amount of dedication that we as metal fans do to decorating our rooms with the metal stuff, getting tattoos, doing sometimes homemade T-shirts or a battle vest. Or battle
which
vest.
Is still not finished. I know, it's not done yet.
I know. I mean, every time I go to work, sometimes there are some days that I can wear my battle vest to work. And all of my coworkers were like, dude, that's a badass battle vest. Did you buy it like that? I'm like, no. I bought the patches and I sew them on by my own. But, it's kind of cool when people who don't understand what you're passionate about and they see it for the first time, they kind of understand a bit more. They don't understand the whole thing, but they understand a bit more. So sometimes I think that metal gets overlooked at times. Granted, metal hasn't had the best reputation. Has had ups and downs. Reputation, especially in the 80s with the Satanic Panic and so on and so forth. But, for the true fans that have stayed, in metal, because I've been a metalhead since I was 8 and I'm 28. So that's 20 years of me being a metalhead. And I've never got tired of it. I still listen to Guns N' Roses. I listen to Brujeria. I listen to the Beatles. I listen to some of the poppy stuff in recent times, but to me, metal's always been my, cup of tea.
Been the constant.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Same.
So, I was actually curious on this one. So, since, of course, especially since being on bigger labels over the years after the initial days in Black Mark, and you guys have done so many tours, played all over the world. Are there any particularly great or even hilarious tour stories that you'd like to share with us? Because we always like to hear some goofy stuff because we're at the heart goofy, at times immature people.
I think we have done it all, really. We have done so many stupid things. We have unloaded the stage naked in Czech Republic. We have what was one time, Johan, we played at somewhere in Europe there was bad advertising, and there was like 6 persons in the audience or something, and it was really nothing. And Johan, when I was playing my guitar solo, he just went over to the bar and ordered a beer and drank the beer and watched me finish my solo, and then came back to the stage. Stuff like that. And yeah, but I think we're more serious these days. But I mean, I wouldn't regret anything that we have done. We have been intoxicated, we have been sober, we have been serious, but we've had a lot of fun, and I think that is the most important thing. But nowadays we are maybe not as fun as we were when we were 25, when we were young and wild in another way. But it's been one hell of a ride, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I remember earlier when I brought up when you guys played Maryland Death Fest 2022. Do you remember which day it was that you guys played? Because I remember it was a 4-day thing. I can't remember which day.
I would believe it was the Saturday, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, Saturday. Because
I don't remember.
Oh, are you gonna bring it up?
Yes,
I'm going to.
I'm going to because. Okay, so I don't know if you was aware of this or not, but towards the end, I think it was the Saturday of 2022 MDF when Autopsy was playing. There was some extracurriculars happening in the crowd where. I can't believe I'm saying
this. How was the best way we can describe it?
There was love in the air in the pit.
I think I heard of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which I like. Okay, like I know if I was in the crowd, I'd be sweaty as a freaking mule if I was there. I couldn't imagine being in the crowd, in the pit, taking that or doing anything like that without feeling like, isn't this a little too much, a little gross for my taste? Because it's just gonna end up being all sweaty. Like, what is going on?
But game is game, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
isn't that? I mean that's like the old Sunset Strip days. That's how it was back
pretty
in
much
the crew and the dance. And I think you Americans just drifted too far away from it, so you feel now it's a thing, but that should be normal, really.
Yeah. What was your reaction when you heard that happened? Because who was it? Was it Hypocrisy? Was it Hypocrisy?
Yeah. I was gonna say that too. Because then the next day. Hypocrisy played, and Peter, he got up on stage and was like, "Yeah, you guys are a bunch of crazy fuckers. You were in the paper today. I mean, I'm not here to judge, but what the fuck? But I don't care if you want to go ahead and fuck. And in the video somebody had of that, there was this one security guard who looked back at Peter and just went." Like smirking, like, what are you on?
Yeah, I remember seeing the video, and I think I sent it to everyone in the chat, and I think you were like, "What the fuck?"
I was like, how? Who would have thought Autopsy could bring out those feelings? I guess.
And on the song "Severed Survival."
Really?
Yeah. I mean, of all bands, can you imagine? I mean, a band like Typo Negative, a band like him, a band like hell, even a band like freaking Behemoth. You're like, okay, you're in the moment, you get those feelings, you want to go down on somebody, but of all bands, Autopsy? Like, can you imagine that in Cannibal Corpse?
Cannibal Corpse would be probably more likely if it were between the two, but that's if you're really messed up in the brain, which granted I often say, like, people call me crazy, I go, I'm insane. I mean, look at my collection. I know I have a problem. Mm-hmm. Or no, I don't have a problem, and if there's an intervention, I ain't showing up.
Yeah,
that's great.
But yeah, it's just those funny stories we hear, like, we go back to Dan Swano again. When we talked to him, he said that one of the things that stood out to him about when he got to work with Opeth for the first time on Orchid, how when Michael was doing his vocal takes, he would go into the booth, but it would just be lit with candles because he wanted to have a little bit of a vibe of the song he was going for. And like Dan would say, like his number one like mind blown moment of his life was hearing Michael on one measure do his incredible growls, which we're so happy he's back doing that again on the new album. Goes from one measure of doing growls, and then the next it's like he goes from sounding like Satan incarnate to the next measure sounding like the most beautiful angel helping you fall asleep to a soothing voice. And Dan would be like, consider me floored. Like, these guys don't make a demo, they just get signed through a promotional thing, and they come in and say, well, we have these 10-minute songs with no verses, bridges, and choruses. Okay, let's go for it. And here we are. And it's those kind of crazy things. Or like even like Bloodbath when they started. Like I remember hearing stories that supposedly Michael puked up blood onto the wall while recording Breeding Death back in 2000. It's those crazy stories, which actually, to kind of close everything off, so whenever I got into hearing more Necrophobic, like I had already listened to the first album, Nocturnal Silence, which I still say is one of the best, but getting more deeper into it with Dawn of the Damned, thinking, wow, how come I've slept on this band for so long? And I remember listening to and watching the music video you guys did for Devil's Spawn Attack with Schmear from Destruction. What was it like to have him, a legendary thrash vocalist from the German scene, get to do a track with you guys? I bet that had to have been one of the best honors imaginable.
Yeah, that was extreme, and that was I wrote that song because the label Central Media wanted one extra song, and I had already finished all the other songs, and I didn't want to write another one. So I wrote it. I was kind of angry because I wanted to go into the next phase, and they said one more song. So I wrote it, and I kind of took out this old school thrash aggression, like Pleasure to Kill vibe on that song. I wanted to make it fast, simple, and really straightforward. And when I listened to it the day after I listened to the demo, and I felt like, hey, this should be sung by like Schmier or Mille or someone of the three uh, great German bands. So we reached out to Schmier because Destruction is really my favorite band of Sodom, Creator, and Destruction. And he was like, sure, yeah, I'll do it. And I was sitting at this table right here when I heard his vocals on this. And I was almost in tears because he has been. I'm such a fanboy when it comes to metal. I admire these musicians so much, and I really don't want to be on the same level. I actually want to look up to them. That's the kid in me, maybe, but I still want to have it like that. And when I heard one of my childhood heroes do the vocals that I had written on the song that I had written, I could not believe it was true. It was so fantastic, and it was one of the best experiences in my whole life as a musician, actually. And I was so proud. I was so proud about it that my hero would sing my words.
Yeah, it's kind of cool when you get these moments because something similar to you. Of course, I mean, I've seen Possessed, and Possessed was one of those bands that got me next to death and kind of, course, into death metal. And I always wanted to see them live, but I never could for X amount of reason. Until last year, I was like, Possessed, Testament, Creator, I'm fucking going. I went there, Possessed opened the show. I lost my whole fucking mind for Possessed because I really wanted to see Possessed. So after the show, I waited outside the Possessed tour bus to see if I could meet Jeff. And I was like, it's getting too late. I'll probably not get the chance. And lo and behold, I actually, for the first time in my life, went up to a tour bus. I've never been in an actual tour bus, and I was like, what am I doing here? This cannot be happening.
It's like,
Am
I
I
need an adult. I don't know what to do.
So we go past this door at the very end, and there's Jeff just hanging out, listening to freaking spiritual healing by death. And with some other guys, and we started talking, hanging out, just telling shit and all that. That he was nice enough to sign my Seven Churches CD, and I got a picture with him.
That's cool. That's really cool.
So I can say I met one of the godfathers of death metal. No one can ever take that away from me.
Nah,
No.
nobody can. And then going back to when you were talking about with that song with Devil Spawn Attack, it's like, and the way you say it, it was just a song that they asked you to come up with to finish up the album. That's kind of like the Black Sabbath Paranoid effect. It's like, we just got to have this extra song, and it turns out, and Paranoid turns out to be one of their biggest songs. And then in the case of Devil Spawn Attack, a great closer to a phenomenal album, even if it's one of the shorter songs. It's just like you said, thrashy to the bone, and even like watching that solo you do, like going back to how you say like you want to start it off to kind of like get everything coming together and into something spontaneous, and then you get those tapping sections, and then those tremolo melodies and harmonies. It just whoa. And then like hearing Schmear and Anders go back and forth doing the push and pull effect. That was definitely something for sure. And the whole album itself, if it wasn't for that album, who knows how much longer it would have been before I discovered you guys. So I will always be grateful to Dawn of the Damned for making me a fan pretty much for good. And funny enough, only missing, it's funny, like me being the big CD collector, both Ricky and I have almost everything of Necrophobic except for Dark Side and Third Antichrist. I just haven't found them at shops yet, because most of my shopping is done online, or really now. Anytime I get a chance to go to a record store, I will scour. And it's been slowly gradual, so eventually Dark Side and Third Antichrist will be, and Spawned by Evil will come into the collection, and I will be complete.
I am complete.
That's great.
So, with that said, that will wrap up episode 83, I believe this was. 83 of the Horsemen podcast, and this was a lot of fun, and it feels good to get back into the rhythm again with doing this. And hopefully we'll have some more guests to come. I know we talked about trying to get John McEntee from Incantation for a while. Just hasn't happened yet, but we'll hopefully get there eventually. But next episode, and I've already told Sebastian this, we're going to be interviewing Jesper Graz from Jotun, which that's going to be a big deep dive into the naturistic world of Jotun's progressive melodic death metal sound, and that's going to be quite a lot of fun. But once again, thank you so much, Sebastian, for coming on here, taking time out of your night to do this. It means the world to us. It means the world to us no matter who it is we get, whether it's a friend, a musician, someone we look up to, what have you.
Thank you for having me.
But until next time, thank you all so much for watching. But until next time, as my old saying goes, keep your horns high and your dreams wet.
Bye.